go a little more big picture here. This is for our podcast listeners who are maybe listening to this a day after the Canucks have beat the Anaheim Ducks. 8 simple rules for managing the Vancouver Canucks blue line. We've come up with 8 things that we think are vital to keeping this blue line fresh, to keeping them competent, and ultimately to keeping the puck out of the Canucks net. I'll go first. My first one feels easy. Keep Hughes Hronek as fresh as possible. They had the morning skate, or they had the maintenance day yesterday off of Canucks practice, and then they were out together at the optional morning skate today. That is exactly what you need to be doing when these guys are playing big minutes and they're playing a ton. The other thing that goes into this same topic is watch their minutes during games. I've asked Rick Tocchet about this, and he's pointed out that power play minutes are easier. Make sure those guys aren't killing too many penalties. Be sure that on a night when you don't need them to play 30 minutes, they are not playing close to 30 minutes. Like, keep their ice time down when the opportunity presents itself. And we've seen a couple instances like that this season, but for the most part, obviously, those guys have played a ton. Keep that pairing fresh as possible is my first rule.
You also don't want to be chasing the game. That's a huge part of it, because you look at the San Jose game, for example, Canucks should have come out and in that first period at least taken the lead, right? And put themselves in a situation where it feels like they have control of the game and you don't have to use them an extraordinary amount. But instead, the Canucks had a stinker of a first period. They surrender the first goal. All of a sudden, now you're trailing, and as a result, Hughes and Hronek's minutes were like they were Hughes, I think, was pushing 30 almost against the San Jose Sharks. That's not ideal. You actually played them more against the Sharks than you would against a typical opponent. So those are the types of things that as a team, now you're not obviously approaching it, and Tocchett's in the locker room saying, "Okay, guys, we need to take care of Hughes and Hronek's minutes. We need a big start." Of course, it's not going to go like that, but there are things that when the team as a whole is clicking will allow that pair to be more fresh. Whereas if the team consistently puts itself at a deficit, is consistently chasing the game, then honestly, Tocchett's going to have no choice but to have to roll those guys out, because who else has offensive touch on this blue line?
Fair enough. My second rule, keep the competition healthy. This is something we've discussed a lot with the forward group in terms of the odd man out, being able to cycle in and out who that is, and keeping it kind of keeping everybody accountable. We just talked about how this team seems a lot more accountable than they have in recent years. I think this goes into it. And when you and I were talking before this show, you took it a step further and you said that even goes down to the guys in Abbotsford, not just whoever's sitting in the press box on any given night. Like, what I'm saying is, okay, Mark Friedman's in the press box tonight. Let's say Noah Juleson has a bad game. Mark Friedman comes in next game and he knows that, okay, if I don't play well, then I've got a guy right behind me who's going to be itching to get back in the lineup. But you brought up Abbotsford, and I found that interesting.
Yeah, well, it just felt last season like when OEL, for example, went down with injury the second half of the season down the stretch, a bunch of the Abbotsford players like Wolanin, like Juleson were recalled, and it didn't feel like the blue line had skipped a beat. I mean, even Breezebaugh, who we still saw him at the rink the other day before practice, so that's good, at least seeing him around the facility, but he hasn't skated in forever. It'd be great to have him healthy again, because he's another at least safer, reliable, calmer option. But last season, it just felt like the Abbotsford defensemen, you weren't as worried about those guys drawing into the lineup. And when those guys are playing competent minutes, it increases the competition level, as you said, and it forces other players to level up.
I also think it goes back to what they talked about in training camp, and that was that, first of all, Jeremy Colleton was on the ice a lot, but Tocchet spoke about how him and Colleton are keeping in pretty close touch about making sure the things that are taught down in Abbotsford are also being what's up in Vancouver. Like, those teams are playing the same systems, for example, that type of thing. I think that's something that goes further into that, of making sure that whoever the next man up is from Abbotsford can kind of step in and not be like, okay, I got to learn this. I got to learn this. I got to learn this. It's like, no, this is basically what I've been doing in Abbotsford, just much, much faster, because obviously it's the NHL. Okay, your first rule. Number 3.
For me, this is a smaller thing, but it can compound and make a difference over the long haul is I'd like to see the Canucks' blue liners, especially aside from Hughes and Hronek because they don't need this work, dedicating extra practice time to work on their puck skills. Now, this may seem sort of strange or cliche, but I remember talking to Luke Shen last season, I believe, and I was speaking to him about how he essentially rebuilt his career because this is a player who in Anaheim was waived, passed up on waivers, nobody wanted him, was an unspectacular sort of depth player at that point, and of course got to the point where he was effectively caddying Hughes in a top 4 role, did the same thing in Toronto with Morgan Riley, got a big contract in Nashville, especially at an older age. So it's like this is an unprecedented sort of aging curve, if you will. And one of the things that he highlighted that I found so interesting was this idea that he said NHL practices aren't really designed to help defensemen work on their puck skills. Because what he references that a lot of the drills as a defenseman, let's say you're defending the rush or it's a lot of battle drills, you aren't making a lot of, let's say, breakouts under pressure. You aren't working on a lot of puck retrievals in your own end, spinning off of checks, some of your edge work, just a little 5 to 10 foot plays that add up and make a huge difference in terms of how quickly you can get out of your own zone. And so when Shen got sent down to San Diego, he immediately called up Adam Oates and spent a ton of time working on those skills rather than just focusing on performance at the gym and getting bigger and getting faster. And we saw it made a world of a difference for him. It's not that all of a sudden he became a great puck mover, but he at least had a decent first pass. And the reason I especially wanted to bring this up was because at practice yesterday, after the main session, I really liked that Adam Foote had a drill that he ran for about 10 minutes where he had all of the defensemen. And of course, Hughes and Hronek had a maintenance day. And it's funny, I was joking that even if they were there, they probably wouldn't need to participate. But it's a simple one-touch passing drill. They just had all the defensemen sort of in a semicircle and just working on quick one-touch passes. And those little things matter because you don't get those reps in regular practices. And it's not like the offseason where you're getting a lot of extra, additional ice time. So whether it's morning skate, whether it's optional practices after your main practices, I think it would make a big difference if Juleson, Friedman, those types of defensemen are working as hard as they can on their puck skills.
I like that. And again, that's the part of the game that those guys struggle with. And that's really good insight from Luke Shen and obviously from you that NHL practices aren't really designed to help those guys excel at those things. And hey, you just pointed out Adam Foote putting in the work with them there. Okay, I'm going to keep this one short. Keep shifts short. Very cliche. You're tired, blah, blah, blah. We hear all this. Keep your shifts short. Don't stay out there for too long, no matter who you are. Forward, defenseman, it's only going to help the Canucks overall defending, not so much just their blue line, going to help their team defense if everybody keeps their shifts short. Okay, what do you got here?
The forwards need to be as disciplined as possible when it comes to penalties. For instance, what we saw in the Seattle game, and of course the PK bailed them out in that game, but you can't take offensive zone penalties. It seems like there's been moments throughout the season where they've taken unnecessary penalties. Now, look, some penalties are more useful than others. If you're tracking a guy on the back check, odd man rush, and you have to tie a guy up, so you're trying to prevent a backdoor tap in, that's a good penalty to take. But some of these holding penalties or obstruction when you're on the forecheck, that's just a little bit lazy, especially because I wanted to highlight this. The blue line as a whole already takes a lot of penalties. I'm not going to expect them, like, sure, I can say, oh, the defensemen should take less penalties, but that's just not realistic. The blue line personnel are who they are. It's on the forwards to help them out as much as possible. So, for instance, if you look at the last 4 seasons, including this one, 215 NHL defensemen that have logged at least 1,500 5-on-5 minutes. Myers has taken the second most penalties of all NHL defensemen. Ian Cole has taken the third most penalties of all NHL defensemen. Carson Soucy has taken the 23rd most penalties of all NHL defensemen. Philip Hronek is pretty high up there as well. Cole McWard drawing into the lineup, we saw that he took a lot of penalties in preseason as well. The point I'm trying to make is I'm not going to all of a sudden expect, like, these are multi-year habits. I'm not expecting those players, especially a guy like Cole who does lack foot speed, to all of a sudden, cut down on those. To me, it's okay, as a forward group, you guys need to be as disciplined as possible, especially because I'm looking at the Canucks' penalty kill numbers, and they've definitely been improved on the season. It's definitely not the tire fire that it was last year, but you look at some of the underlying results. Canucks rank 29th on the penalty kill in terms of their shot against rate and 27th in expected goals against. So this is not a PK unit that can bail you out consistently, in my opinion. Plus, the more time you spend shorthanded, those are just heavy, taxing minutes, especially for those defensemen that are going to have to be blocking shots, battling down low. And we talk about wanting to keep Hughes and Hronek as fresh as possible, especially Hronek, who logs a ton of shorthanded minutes. The onus, in my opinion, has to be on the forwards to stay out of the box.
You deleted one of mine by accident in the doc.
Did I?
Yeah, you did. And I can't figure out what it was. It was something good, I thought, but you just took it out of it.
No, I rearranged my one and moved it up.
Oh, I see.
I didn't delete any of yours.
Oh, okay.
Trying to blame me?
Well, I'm like looking at the doc. Anyways. Okay, this is a good one. I think you actually wrote this one. But simplify Tyler Myers' game and stay healthy enough to limit him to 18 minutes per night. You're not gonna get comments from Rick Tocchet that Tyler Myers has been one of our best players if Tyler Myers is playing in that 2-3 role that he's been forced to play throughout his Canucks tenure. The thing he was struggling with so much earlier in the season was not making the simple plays. This has been highlighted a lot in the Stanchies a lot recently. Wyatt's done an exceptional job of pointing this out, but there's been a few plays where Myers has looked like a completely different defenseman because he has just held on to the puck and he's just using his huge frame to shield off the opposition, and they cannot get to the puck because he is larger than them. It is simple. That is what simplifying your game looks like, making the smart plays, not being so frantic and, dare I say, chaotic in your own zone. Myers has really cleaned that up, and it's allowed the Canucks to be better in all areas of the ice because he's making these better decisions, these simple decisions, most notably in his own end on the breakout attempts. But just a good example is he goes into the corner. There's 2 forecheckers coming down on him. Before, we've seen him shoot it up the middle, hammer it up the wall as hard as he can, and just try to get it out, do something crazy as fast as possible. But lately, what we've seen him do, and watch for this tonight, folks, is he'll shield the puck, and they'll be on either side of him, but he'll wait until maybe the last possible second, and then just calmly chip it up to the winger, who obviously with 2 guys forechecking is somewhat open, and he has the ability to then make the next play. And it all starts with Tyler Myers just making a simple, safe play, hanging on to the puck for an extra second longer, but keeping it in a safe space. This is a great one for managing the Canucks blue line. Allow Tyler Myers to keep playing that simple game we've seen lately that's led to Tocchet saying he's one of the best players of all time.
Part of it is also out of the Canucks' control, which is staying healthy enough so that you're able to reduce his minutes so he's only in the 18-ish minute range. And not just volume of minutes, but the matchups that entails. Because when Myers is pushing 20 plus, that means he's going to spend a big chunk of his minutes against top 6 competition. And that's where I think he can get exposed a little bit. Whereas if he's in a spot where he's mostly playing middle 6, bottom 6 competition, that's when I feel like you're putting him more so in a position to succeed. Because I'll say this, for as much as we criticize Myers and the contract, look, we know he's overpaid. I really believe that he'd be totally fine as a bottom pair defenseman on a good team that has the right support around him. I believe that would be the type of environment that would be conducive for him to play a simpler, calmer style. And it was interesting. I think Tocchet in one of his availabilities specifically cited that he was mentioning to Myers that, hey, you don't need to lead the rush earlier in the season. That's one of the things they told him was, you don't need to be as aggressive pushing up the ice and trying to make things happen offensively. And that's also the mark of a lot of smart veterans. One of the things I loved about Luke Shen for example, was that he knew exactly the parameters of what he could and couldn't do.
That's a great point.
He never tried to do too much, whereas sometimes you have defensemen, and because they have physical gifts, they will try and do things that put themselves in trouble. And that's where sometimes with Myers, even sometimes they'll be pinching too aggressively in the wrong spot, and it leaves him in a bad position, right? And those are the areas that he's cleaned up recently that has helped him, I think, play a cleaner overall game.
Okay. We have 7 on this, Doc. I thought we had 8. So 7 simple rules for managing the Canucks defense. You've got the final one here.
Yeah. Again, going back to what Talkett said yesterday that I thought was really interesting, and it's an extension of the conversation we had last week where we were mentioning that, okay, so much of the Canucks' problem with the blue line has been on breakouts, and part of the onus is on the forwards to hustle harder. And Talkett had mentioned that they needed to do some work with the forwards to review tape and sort of ensure that their wingers and centers are coming deep enough in the right positions and becoming open. As an add-on, he mentioned yesterday that they also need to demand the puck, that they need to be vocal about really wanting it, that it's also not just being in the right spot, but making it really easy so that as soon as you get the puck as a defenseman on a puck retrieval, you don't have to think about what you're going to do with it. I think that's where defensemen who are less skilled, they run into issues when they're hanging on to the puck too long because they're analyzing their options and trying to decide what to do. Whereas if you're a forward and you're beaver tailing it, it's so easy where as a defenseman, before you even get the puck, you already know what you're going to do with it. And that makes a world of a difference. You don't have to think. And that's why some defensemen, you want to know why Florida, for example, can turn almost every defenseman into a good player. We've seen them reclamation projects with Forsling and Montour and Ekman Larson. It's because, and I specifically saw this with OEL as well, and we know that his foot speed is not the best. Their wingers will come back and they're demanding the puck. And so OEL, when he's coming around, it's just a one touch. He doesn't even need to fully corral the puck. One touch backhand, rim to the wall, and it's a clean breakout. So that's, one area where it's not just being in the right spot too. It's really demanding it, because I'll say this too. I'm sure everybody who's, whether it's hockey or soccer, sometimes you'll know of teammates where they're in the right spot, but they don't really want to get puck possession there. And so they're in the right spot, but you can tell they're sort of like looking to hide a little bit, or they aren't quite coming deep enough. And that's where a defenseman takes that extra half a second to be like, okay, is this winger actually in a spot where he wants the puck? Is he safe? And so that means taking more responsibility on for the forwards.
Okay, so that was 7 rules. Grady, do you have an 8th rule? You can just say no if you don't. But I'd like us to come up with, we can come up with an 8th rule. What's the 8th rule to managing the Canucks defense? Come on.
Clone Quinn Hughes.
Boom, done. Clone Quinn Hughes. And there you have it, folks. Canucks Conversation with Harmon and Quads every weekday at 2 p.m. Be sure to check it out on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. And if you missed it, go check it out on your favorite podcast catcher app.